I call this public hearing to order, I welcome all present in this room. This meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, PALView. I would like to remind members of the viewing, listening public and those present in this room that this special select committee of the Parliament was mandated by the Parliament to obtain information, documentation, and/or evidence relevant to and/or touching and concerning the method, criterion, and considerations utilized by the Police Service Commission and/or the firm employed by the Police Service Commission in the selection of candidates for the position of Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police, to enable the House of Representatives to consider the notifications submitted to it by His Excellency, the President, pursuant to Section 123 of the Constitution, and to report to the House of Representatives by the 31st of March 2018. For the record, and in the spirit of good human conduct, I would like to invite, beginning with the former chairman of the commission, those who are present, and of course, we invited today the members of the commission as it then was, and of course, the firm. So we now invite you, beginning with the chairman, to introduce yourselves for the record. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. My name is Dr. Maria Gomes, and I'm the former chairman of the Police Service Commission.
Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. I am Prabhavati Muraj, Acting Director of Personnel Administration.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. I am Dinanath Ramkisoon, member of the Commission.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. My name is Dushyant Sukram. I'm the Managing Partner for KPMG in Trinidad and Tobago.
Good afternoon, Chairman. I'm Commodore Anthony Franklin, member of the Service Commission.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Martin George, member of the Police Service Commission.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. I'm Abigail De Freitas, Partner of Advisory Services at KPMG in Trinidad and Tobago.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Marcia Pyle-O'Brady, Acting Deputy Director of Personnel Administration.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Natasha Citra, Legal Advisor, Service Commissions Department.
Good afternoon. Kavita Joran, Service Commissions Department, Senior State Counsel.
I am Fitzgerald S. Albert Hines, Chairman, Member of Parliament, and Chairman, of course, of this committee.
Rudal Monilal, Member.
Terence Diyal Singh, Member.
Nicole Olivier, Member.
Ganga Singh, Member.
I am Randall Mitchell, Member.
We did receive your request to have with us in this room other members of staff of the Commission/DPA, and we conceded that, so we welcome all who have joined us in this room in that regard. We are familiar with each other. We've met before. This is our second hearing, and therefore there is no need for any introductory remarks per se. I would like to, on behalf of this committee and more importantly on behalf of the public who may not have gotten it very clear, I don't know if you want the firm who was tasked with the responsibility and we have Mr. Sukram here, or whether we would have the commission, I would like the public to understand very succinctly and very clearly, with as much detail as is necessary for clarity and understanding, the stages of this process and what each entailed. So we were hearing about stages. I'd first like to know from your perspective how many stages there were in this process and a bit of a description of each. Because we need to know from you how you saw it. We have a good idea of what the law says. So, Madam Chair or Mr. Sukram, who actually engaged by the Service Commission to carry out this process, could you, for our benefit and for the benefit of the public, understand this process in stages, please?
I would like to invite the Commodore to start off by sharing the process in the stages.
Yes.
As we've come a little more prepared this time with some of the questions and issues that the public would need to know.
Are you suggesting that you were not thoroughly prepared on the last occasion?
Well, we were prepared, but we didn't know exactly what questions you would ask. So.
Okay, suffice that to be so. Mr. Franklin, Commodore Franklin, how many stages would you say you recognized in this process?
Okay, Chairman. Can I answer that in the context of what I was about to say to clear up some of the misconceptions we had last time?
I would be happy to learn from you how many stages, and then you can proceed.
Yes, sure.
Just so that I can have a blueprint to run with. How many stages did you all consider this process consisted of?
Right, so the screening process after the applications received, screening, and then we had the assessment center, which comprised 2 stages in the assessment center. Right. Then we had the commission preparing its order
Right.
merit list.
So
within the assessment center, it's a multi-part assessment center. So there are several parts within that: panel interview, role play, media interview, and all that. I can read them out: psychometric evaluation, panel interview, scenario testing, and
So just for my own basic understanding, applications invited and received. That's first thing.
Yes.
Then you had screening.
Correct.
Then you had assessment,
Yes.
which you just said consisted of 2 stages.
Right.
And thereafter
the commission.
Thereafter, a process undertaken by the commission,
Sure.
as opposed to the firm.
Right.
Okay. Could you just, by way of further clarity, so the application, that's clear, and there were 54 of them,
Yes.
you told us the other day. And then you went on to the screening. What does this screening process consist of?
Okay, I would defer to KPMG to deal with that.
Thank you very warmly.
Thank you, Commodore. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The screening process really entailed the initiation of the leadership competency model, and the applicants were assessed based on that leadership competency model. The leadership competency model really spoke about 4 elements of leadership. So the candidates were fully aware when they made the application that they will be assessed on that leadership competency model. And the people who assessed the applicants, they were all trained and fully aware of the model that was being used to assess the applicants.
The leadership competence model that was decided upon in collaboration with the with KPMG and the service PSC?
Yes, the leadership competency model was agreed to at the inception of the engagement by the firm, KPMG, and the members of the PSC, the Police Service Commission.
Did it incorporate in that competency model both the position of Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police in the competency model, leadership competency model?
So that's a good question, and the answer to it is yes. It is yes because the strategy that we use at the inception of the project was a talent pool strategy. It was meant to find the best talent and then decide which positions they're most suitable to. So it was agreed at the beginning of the engagement.
So what were the elements of this leadership competency model, the design elements?
So let me just get it here. So it had to deal with the leadership skills. So the competencies tested under leadership skills were executive policing skills, the ability to lead strategic change, leading the workforce, and decision-making. That was under the leadership skills. The other element tested was the people skills, which really relates to working with others, serving the public, and managing performance. The other element had to deal with technical skills, which was professional policing skills and operational management. And the fourth element in that leadership competency model had to deal with business policing skills. So those were the elements that were tested, and all encompassing, we looked at the professionalism element of the individuals in front of us.
Through you, Chair, how do you deal with the notion that there ought to have been separate streams in the context of the leadership competency model for the DCOP and for the COP?
So the difference between, if you look at the job descriptions between the DCP and the COP, it's not night and day. It is integral to the support of the leadership of the police service. It's a competency model to test skills that are required to function effectively at that level. One, the DCP, was merely to support the COP. So it wasn't vastly different. So the competencies required from both positions were equally important.
So, yes, Madam Oliver.
If I just ask for clarity, is it that all 50 eligible candidates would have gone through that screening process?
The answer is yes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask specifically to KPMG about the contractual terms. In reading the contract, it says here, the Police Service Commission will contract you to recruit for the offices of COP, and two, you are being paid $3.1 million to come up with two positions, correct? That's in your contract. Correct. Good. Then I go to paragraph 20.4 of the contract, where it says that the firm will remain independent with regard to decision-making, objectivity. I am putting in my words here, I interpret that as there's no bias, etc. Section 21 of the contract speaks about duties of the commission. I interpret duties of the commission and 20.4, the firm, to be separate. I then go to the order under the Constitution from sections 3 right down to 4, where I interpret it as a layman that the firm, KPMG, will carry out 1, 2, 3, which includes recruitment and assessment, and then you give to the firm the results of your work.
To the commission.
To the commission. Am I correct? Yes. Good. Question, therefore, flows is this. What legal authority did KPMG use to vary, in my own legal, to vary the contract by including members of the Police Service Commission in the assessment process which you were engaged to provide?
So section 20.4 of the engagement contract, and I will read it so that we will be clear as to what you are implying.
Right.
It is understood and agreed that all decisions shall be the Commission's responsibility and made by the Commission. In the firm carrying out its work, the firm will maintain independence, in particular with regard to decision-making and objectivity. And with regard to decision-making and objectivity, we remain independent in every aspect of our work, every aspect.
But, Mr. Sukram, we heard on the last occasion that 2 members of the commission, was it 2 or 3?
It was 1 for each panel.
That Commodore Franklin and Mr. Ramkisoon were trained by KPMG as members of the commission to sit in the assessment process for which you were contracted to provide.
And that information is correct. And I just want to clarify one thing with regards to the High Court judgment. It's CV 2016-01218, which says, and I quote from this judgment, and this judgment takes a precedent over Legal Notice 218, which describes the process. And I will go on to say, and I quote, any such firm can only be a tool of the Commission and cannot exercise any independent discretion to the exclusion of the Commission, except as expressly authorized, mandated, and contracted by the Commission. This engagement is the PSC's engagement. They engage KPMG to help the PSC with the recruitment process. It wasn't KPMG's engagement. We maintained objectivity and independence throughout the process, and I will say that time and time again. 1 of 5 panel members were invited to the panel, and if we take 1 in 5, that is 20%. 20% cannot skew or deter the independence.
No, that's a matter.
Of
That's
KPMG.
another matter. We can accept as.
I am still looking for the answer. On what basis did you vary the contract to include members of the PSC in your assessment process? And can that decision to include members of the PSC in the assessment process stand legal challenge, in your opinion?
The contract was not varied in any way to include the member of the PSC. The legal notices doesn't speak to the composition of the assessment panel, nor does the engagement contract.
So you are confident that the decision to train members of the PSC to be assessors can stand legal scrutiny?
Is it the decision to train the members, or is it the decision to include them in the panel?
And both.
Okay, so yes.
Okay. Tell me something. In looking at the stage 1 for the assessment, under role fit, I think which Commodore Franklin spoke about when you went through the different, it says here, this was described as the panel's professional judgment of the candidate's probability of success in the designated role. It is based on past experience of performing executive recruitment. Did any members of the PSC who were engaged by KPMG have the necessary past experience in executive recruitment to conduct role play?
I think that would be a question that the members and the PSC
Sure.
should.
So, Commodore Franklin, what is your past experience in executive recruitment?
Well, I have been chairman of at least 1 board and vice chairman of 2, and I have done executive recruitment at that level.
Are you HR trained in executive recruitment?
After 30-something years in the military, you get a lot of HR training. Because that's what you're dealing with, people. Whether people to use weapons or people to handle ships.
Are you trained? Are you qualified? Do you have qualifications and certifications?
No, I have no degree in HR.
Mr. Ramkisoon, what is
Thank you
your
very much, Mr.
qualifications in
Mr.
executive recruitment?
Might I just preface that the decision of the commission.
No, before you answer that, just answer the question of the member, please.
I am about to answer.
Mr. Ramkisoon, the member has asked a specific question. What's the question, Mr. Dialsing?
What is your training and or certification in executive recruitment?
Mr. Dialsing, I have 42 years in public service. I have had numerous occasions of dealing with recruitment and recruitment processes. I have no certification in it.
So just for clarity, you have no experience / qualifications in executive recruitment?
As a formal, I have no formal qualification. I have experience in HR. But more than that, with your leave, Mr. Chair.
Not right now.
Thank you. Just a follow-up on that. So between Mr. Ramkisoon and Mr. Franklin, you all had 86 years experience in leadership.
Definitely.
Mr. Franklin, really,
please note that I said I've had significant experience in executive recruitment.
Yes. At the very beginning, I just want to take you back because this is a continuation of a process that started. You indicated that there were some items, I think the chairman indicated initially, some items that you wish to raise to assist the committee. Could I ask you to just indicate what are those items and what you could say to assist us, bearing in mind not only what has happened so far, but on the last occasion?
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Some of it would have been mentioned by Mr. Sukram already, but I would like to invite the committee to recognize certain things. The leadership of the TTPS, the positions of commissioner and deputy commissioner form a job group. As Mr. Sukram mentioned, that you can't really distinguish between them in terms of their responsibilities. And therefore, they should have same skill sets. And that was an important understanding. That is an important understanding that set up how we got to the competency model that we had used. So I also invite you to consider that unlike the corporate environment, there are no specializations among the deputy commissioners, no, between the deputy commissioner and the commissioner. Whereas in the corporate world, you would have a VP HR, VP IT, and finance, and so on. At the leadership level of the police service, there are no specializations. They all must be competent in police management, police leadership, dealing with people, and so on. So we consider that a job group, the commissioner and the deputy commissioners. Thus, we ended up using a single model for a single competency model. And of the 4 competency models around, whether it's job or functional or organizational, we chose a leadership competency model. And this was designed by KPMG. And the commission is satisfied that that leadership competency model is best practice.
Are you finished?
Yes, sorry.
No, I'm not, but...
Please.
So we are satisfied that KPMG designed a competency model and looking at the premier leaders in law enforcement agencies around the world, and also reviewing various practices and as well as information from surveys from local stakeholders. So I can refer to the United Kingdom College for Policing and the Association of Police Commissioners. And they identify a leadership competency model as best practice.
Actually, you are saying that the commission formed the view that the 2 positions, commissioner and deputy, were of one job group, and therefore there was not sufficient difference between the 2 positions such that it led you to using one single competency model for both. That's your submission.
That is correct.
Good. Now, you are mandated to comply with legal notice, which is an order of the president. Legal notice number 218. Am I correct?
Correct.
It is in that legal notice that we see that the commission was mandated in that order, section 3A, the commission shall contract an appropriate local firm, hereinafter referred to as the firm, to conduct a recruitment process, including inviting applications for the positions. So notwithstanding the human resource experience and capacity of which you boast, and I didn't say boast with a capital B, with a common B, both you and Mr. Ramkissoon, and no doubt Mr. George, Madam Gomez, Madam Chairman, and others, Gomes, may have had equal or more HR competencies. The president's order told you, by way of law, that you should hire a firm to carry out that process. Is that correct?
The words there, but you just heard.
No, just a second. No, Mr. Franklin. I just want clarity for those members of this committee and those who are listening.
Words you read are accurate, but
the words are accurate. Good.
You just heard Mr. Graham.
I'm coming to that. So the law mandated you to hire a firm to conduct this selection process. Let me use the exact words, the recruitment process. Now, we were told by you then, on the last occasion, and today, through your lips and that of Mr. Sukram, that having read those words, this matter of this order was the subject of a pronouncement by a judge of the High Court, Mr. Justice Rajkumar, as he then was. We all, this committee, have copies of that judgment, which some of us have read. Well, let me say, which I have not read, but I have studied. And your submission is that the judge's pronouncement is what led you as a commission to being as intimately involved in the selection process that the words of this suggested should have been left to the firm. So while you agreed with me, put simply as I move on, that the words say the firm should do it, it is your interpretation of the judgment of Mr. Rajkumar, and it is the opinion that you would have obtained copies of which has come to us, an internal opinion, well, no, and legal advice on 3 or 4 occasions, as Mr. George told us, that taught you or told you that you should be intimately involved in the selection process, the recruitment process, along with KPMG. Am I correct? I'm correct. No, that's okay. Once I'm correct, I'm good enough for the time being. Now, do you consider, Mr. Franklin, Mr. Sukram, that there's any difference between the word selection as opposed to recruitment based on your reading of the order, your understanding of it, your reading and understanding of the judgment of Mr. Justice Rajkumar as he then was? Do you consider that there may be a difference between the word selection and the word recruitment? Your answer, please.
I would not think that there is much of a difference in this project. That
not much, but do you consider that there is any difference?
No, I perhaps...
Just a second.
Seeing that this has some legal connotations, I would like to invite my legal colleague here to answer.
Well, no, this is not, strictly speaking, a matter of law. This is a matter of your understanding of the judgment, which led you to a certain course of action. This is a matter of your understanding of the order, both taken together, which led you to being intimately involved in the recruitment process. So this is not a matter of law. We could easily get a legal opinion, this committee, and you too. We are talking about your understanding of it, and then you are now saying to this committee that you see no difference between the meaning of the word in this context, recruitment, as distinct from selection. Okay?
Chairman, if I may.
Just a moment. Well, once we get that, I will give way now to Mr. Mitchell and then you, Mr.
Sure.
Dayal Singh, and then Dr. Munilal. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and through you, just staying on that same point. Now, if we are to take your evidence at its highest, and it is your evidence today that the judgment allowed for the Police Service Commission to be integral at all parts of the assessment process. And I'm going as precursors to your contract. Your terms of reference at scope of services 9 and 10, you indicate develop and submit to the Commission the competency framework to be utilized for the assessment of candidates, and at 10, the firm shall submit to the Commission the results of its assessment process, and a report on its assessment of the entire assessment process. So nowhere in your terms of reference, which I believe, I assume now, to have been developed subsequent to the judgment, and to go further, in KPMG's proposal at phase 2 and 3, but more particularly phase 3, there is no evidence here that the Police Service Commission was to be a part or was to be specifically trained to be a part of the assessment. So my question to you is, if your understanding from the judgment that the Police Service Commission was to be a part of and integral to the assessment process, why was that not in your terms of reference? Why was it not in the proposal by KPMG? Why was it not specifically laid out in the contract? And after you answer that, if you can tell me, when did it change? When did you make the decision for the Police Service Commission to be a part of the assessment process?
I will answer. Before we actually started the process, we met on several occasions with the senior counsel who...
Which process? Sorry.
Beg pardon?
Which process?
In terms of the selection process, the entire process.
Right. Would that mean before you invited applications?
At the tender stage or?
With senior counsel, was that consultation before you invited applications?
Yeah. Yes, we met with senior counsel before. We met in April.
All right. Thank you. Proceed.
So in terms of the opinion of senior counsel, we were advised that the commission, in accordance with the Constitution, which supersedes everything, that the commission has the power and authority to decide as it will, whether we participate, whether we give the firm completely to do the exercise. It was the decision and the prerogative of the commission to do so.
Right. Just let me, as a subsidiary question before I give way again. It meant, based on what you just said, if the commission chose to, which is how I understand Mr. Rajkumar to have spoken, if the commission had chosen to rely exclusively on the work of KPMG, it had the power to do that. Would that be correct?
Yes.
And according to you, if the commission chose to participate in the recruitment process and the scoring, it had the power to do that. Is that your position?
Yes, it is.
Good. In other words, the commission under the Constitution had the power to do that which it will. But at all times, the final selection, and at all material times, the responsibility for the process would always be that of the commission. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Great. Now, only because it comes smoothly after, I will not give way, because this is not my forum, this is the people's forum. Do you consider that since the mandate of the Police Service Commission includes recruitment of a deputy commissioner and the commissioner, or a commissioner and deputy commissioners, for precision, and it also includes your constitutional mandate to oversee their work on an ongoing basis and to evaluate their work and to determine whether they should remain in office or whether they should be terminated or fired. All of that constituted your duty. Would that be correct to say?
Yes, that is correct.
And that you were doing that role long before you started this selection process. Would that be correct to say?
Yes, that is correct.
And therefore, you would have had direct dealings with, the files of, communication with, consultation with, assessment of those persons, at least some of the persons who were engaged in this recruitment process. Would that be correct to say?
Yes, that is correct.
And therefore, the members of the commission who would have been performing those duties, who would now be participating in this particular process, would have had previous contact with, previous knowledge of, previous records and files of some of the persons who had made application in this process. Would that be correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
And therefore, would you agree on that basis that it is very possible that members of the commission who would have been involved in that, working with these men and women, are now involved intimately in a scoring and assessing? Would you agree, and this is a technical assessment, technical competencies we're looking at, technical skills. Would you agree with me, Madam Chair, that it is possible, hear my word, possible, that going into this particular recruitment process, there could have been some predispositions on the basis of pre-knowledge of some of the people who are now before you in this process? Would you accept that?
Let me answer exactly what you're asking.
Well, I hear the question I'm exactly asking. Would you accept that it is possible that going into this process, on some of those persons, members of the commission would have had, or could have had, pre-knowledge, pre-knowledge is clear, but predispositions as to the technical competencies, because that is the stage we're at now, of some of these applicants? Would you accept that?
In order to avoid what you are saying,
just now, before we come to the avoidance, I would like to know, Madam Chair, would you accept that that was possible?
No, because we were trained and we were very cognizant of exactly what you are talking about. And so all members collectively took decisions and, with the assistance of the firm, went into this process, compartmentalizing the performance appraisal exercise that we do Because if we didn't, then we would convolute everything. So clearly, we did not go into the process
I did not
as
ask,
you suggested.
in fairness to you and in fairness to me, I did not ask whether you did that. I asked whether you accepted that it was possible.
It's possible, but it didn't happen.
Good. Now, having heard that it did not happen, for the moment, I'll give way to my colleague.
Thank you.
But it is a matter to which we shall return. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will be equally brief as you have been. Could I just ask Mr. Franklin or Mr. George or any other person who care, what is your interpretation, not specifically of the judgment that you read earlier, that part, but your interpretation of legal notice 218 in terms of the removal, the excising of certain parts? What is your interpretation of that? How taking off those parts, and specifically, as you know, 3A, 3B completely, and D1 amended, your interpretation of that in the context of that entire process you undertook? That's one. And secondly, well, could I ask that, and then I'll come to the other issue, because it's not related.
Okay, well, if I could, in relation to that, what was clear is that the judgment made a dramatic difference to the entire process. Because if we remember historically, what had happened is that the process had then begun by the minister issuing the request for the recruitment exercise to begin. The legal action was filed, basically saying that, look, even by the simple act of the minister requesting, that is an infringement on the constitutional independence of the Police Service Commission. The judge agreed with that and then went on to excise other parts of the order to say, well, look, it must at all times be a circumstance where the Police Service Commission is free to act independently of any other interference or any other dictate. In that regard, what I'd say also, as far as the actions of the firm are concerned, the Police Service Commission, based upon the advice we received from senior counsel, it was always very clear to us that we must own the actions of the firm. So whether it meant that, some members would sit with people in the firm and go through the scenarios and ensure that they understood the process, whether it meant that we then dissected the results, went back to the firm and said, hey, listen, we're not happy with this. We think that, you didn't do enough in this area. We must own the process. And that is what we understood to be the fundamental changes that were wrought as a result of the judgment of Justice Rajkumar.
Mr. George, if I could continue. So in your opinion, and the opinion of the Police Service Commission, if you had a weight to place, you felt that the change in law would have fallen on the side of the complete, even over-involvement of the Police Service Commission, rather than their partial or minimal withdrawal from any process?
Well, Honourable Member, you have a gift for simplicity that I don't possess. But I would say that from our understanding of it, the court made it clear that we must take full responsibility. So even though you are allowed to engage a firm, it must not at all be a scenario where the firm dictates to you. If you recall, on the last sitting before this honourable chamber, I indicated that, I particularly was very concerned to ensure that the tail doesn't wag the dog. So in terms of even things that the firm suggested, some members were very, critical, very skeptical, very, they questioned things to ensure that we, at the end of the day, felt satisfied that we can answer in terms of what we felt was the process and what we felt was done in terms of the selection. As regards one other thing, I'll just say, if you'll permit me, sorry, that's the problem when you give an attorney the chance to speak. But in terms of the understanding of the initial, the module, right, in terms of the competency model, I am not sure that I am entirely happy with the way it has been expressed, because as I understood it, and of course I may be totally subject to correction and I could be absolutely wrong, but as I understood it, the single competency model was used as basically your entry-level qualification. In other words, as I understood it, and my appreciation of it, and I think this goes to some of the questions that have come from Honourable Member Dialsingh and Honourable Member Oliveri. I understood it as an entry level. In other words, even if you are deputy commissioner, then you must at least have some basic competencies. So in other words, a single competency model can be applied in that way at the start, ab initio. But then you, of course, would do your disaggregation in relation to, as Honourable Member Dialsingh quite correctly pointed out, to show the different skill sets required for commissioner and deputy commissioner.
What you've just said in respect of the single competency model, in my estimation, is markedly different from what I had heard earlier yet.
And as I said, I could be absolutely wrong, but it seems to be the only common sense, practical way that I could understand using a single competency model for two positions which the Constitution defines differently.
Your simple common sense approach is markedly different from what we had heard earlier. Very different.
I accept that.
But all it says to us, but we'll come back to that. Madam, Madam Oliveri, please, let's continue.
Chair, thank you.
Sure. Just a second, Madam Oliveri.
Well, given the Commission's intimate involvement in all stages of the assessment process, let me just confirm that at any point, did the Commission have any cause to disagree with the results of any of the stages of the assessment? Or are you, as you said, were fully satisfied with how it was conducted? Was there any area of disagreement with the results of any of the stages of the assessment?
During the stages of the assessment, the panel had discussions after each interview, and we came to agreement on marks. Right? Individuals submitted their marks, but we had discussions. Right? Sometimes we disagreed with the mark another person put. Right? But so be it.
So at the end of each stage, so what is defined in what's detailed in the selection process assessment report, all the results for the various stages? This was something that the Commission would have agreed with and abided by.
Yes, we had consensus. Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the actual wording. At each stage that we go, you indicated that both jobs form in the same job family. So you're looking at similar roles. Yet, when you report at the end of each stage, so at the end of stage 1, the summary of results, you indicated that 4 of the 20 candidates were deemed suitable for the position of Commissioner of Police only. 15 were deemed suitable for the role of Deputy Commissioner of Police only, and 1 candidate was deemed equally suitable for both. Now, I'm placing a lot of emphasis on the use of the word only in this case, at the end of stage 1 of the assessment. Then we move on to stage 2 of the assessment, where it's a smaller number of candidates. And again, the wording at the end of it is 4 candidates would maintain their suitability for the position of Commissioner of Police only. 7 candidates were found suitable for the role of Deputy Commissioner of Police only, and 1 candidate remained suitable for both. Now, this was the end of the firm's involvement in determining the process. And when you go to the end of it, the order of merit list that was provided by the Commission, there were 4 names put forward for the position of Commissioner of Police. There were 7 names put forward for the position of Deputy Commissioner of Police. There is some overlap in both lists. Now, what is concerning me is that 1 candidate in particular was previously identified as being suitable for the position of Deputy Commissioner of Police only, but that candidate now appears on the order of merit list for Commissioner of Police. So what I'm trying to understand is, was there... Yes. So, using the key, yes. I'm speaking about candidate J, who in the first two stages was deemed suitable for the position of Deputy Commissioner of Police only. Yet candidate J appears on the order of merit list for Commissioner of Police in the final order. So I'm inquiring what would have changed to make this candidate now eligible for the position of Commissioner of Police when on all indication they were just a Deputy Commissioner only.
Yeah. You can answer, Madam Gomes. Yes. Save Mr. Sukram.
Yeah, you know what? I really shouldn't ask Mr. Sukram because this was our portion of it. I'm sorry.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
I was looking at it.
No,
you said
all
candidate
is your
J.
portion.
You said candidate J. Thank you very much.
No, just a second. Let's for clarity, not for me, for those who are listening. Based on your interpretation, the whole thing is your portion.
Yes.
Right? Good. Yes. Yeah, just now.
Whilst the whole thing is theirs,
there are some technical issues that we might see.
No, the firm completed the exercise. The order of merit is determined by the commission in its sole prerogative.
Correct. But no, we were told earlier, this committee was told that the understanding that the commission proceeded with, even before they invited applications, they consulted with senior counsel on the basis of Mr. Rajkumar's judgment and on the basis of their reading of Legal Notice 218. We were told that they were made to understand, and the commission accepted that the entire process constitutionally would be theirs. In other words, you could not be heard to say KPMG is to blame for nothing or did that or did that. That's our own. We just use KPMG as a resource to do this, and their decisions become ours. That's the understanding they approached it with. Madam Gomes, please proceed.
Okay, Ms. Olivier, Madam Olivier, I'm not sure if I understand your question completely. Okay. Yeah.
Example, on the key that we have, candidate J was identified at the end of the second stage, at the first and second stage, to have been assessed by you, since it was all your responsibility, to have been fit for the position of Deputy Commissioner of Police only. She stressed on that word, only. And at the end of the process, candidate J emerged among those who were considered for the position of Commissioner of Police. The member wants to know, when did it change? On what basis it changed? In other words, put colloquially, permit me, I know this is formal writing, how comes? She wants to know how did that happen and when?
This was changed at the discussion of the commission and at the commission only.
Give way to Mr. Dayal Singh. You mean, because I had begun this session by asking for you to outline the different stages and what they entailed. We did not get very far along that road. We got sidetracked with other issues, but I am keeping focus on that. The first thing was inviting applications. The second thing was a screening process, which I understood Commodore Franklin to have said involved, a screening process, which involved reviewing the application forms and suitability on the approved competency model, which Mr. George is now telling us, in contradistinction to what we heard earlier, was an entry requirement. This is the way he saw it as a member. Only an entry requirement because other things were to come. This screening, the list of the applicants, their eligibility status and so on, and out of which you selected 20 persons. So you had applications invited and received, and then you had a screening process. At the end of the screening process, 20 persons would have gone on for assessment. And that assessment consisted of 2 stages. Am I correct, Commodore? Right. And then after those 2 assessment stages, the commission alone did a further interview process and a further assessment. Just now. Well, explain then. I might be wrong. I want you to explain. After the 2 stages, so you had applications, you had screening, you had assessment in 2 stages. After that, the commission acted on its own. Am I correct?
The 2 stages had 2 panel interviews.
Technical assessment.
No, panel interviews. The first panel interview involved 1 member of the commission and 5 from KPMG. The second panel interview...
No, Mr. Franklin, I hate
I'm
to
clarifying for you.
I hate to trouble you. Those are not the details we are looking for here.
Okay, sure.
Those are not the details we're looking for here. For the time being, I want to understand what Dr. Gomes said. Dr. Gomes, in answer to the question put by Member Oliver, she said, when Member Oliver asked, if you had a man only DCP, how did you end up with him as COP? And she wanted to know how and when. And I was trying to clarify, because Dr. Gomes then said, the commission decided that. So I understood that to mean the commission now, after the assessment with KPMG, acting on its own. Am I correct or wrong?
You are only partly correct. Because the second interview is the one that involved the commission. And after that, the commission met on its own. No interview.
Yes, I understand.
Right? That's the difference.
What I wanted to know, having understood that, is whether the change that Ms. Oliver identified took place in the last phase with the commission acting on its own.
Correct.
That is correct.
That's correct.
Could I?
Just now. So it now tells Ms. Oliver when it happened. And it happened after the 2 stages of assessment, and it happened while the commission was now acting on its own.
That is correct.
Good. Ms. Oliver also wanted to know on what basis that happened. Without calling names, we have a key. Please, Ms. Oliver.
The basis is that
and then she'll be permitted any follow-up comments.
All information into consideration.
I am confused because, no, you took part in the previous assessment, you agreed with the results. Results were clear. This candidate is not suitable. This candidate is only suitable for 1 position. How then do you go against the results of 2 previous states of assessment in which you were involved if you did not have cause to query the integrity of those 2 previous assessment processes in which you participated?
That is, I was going to say, that's simple. Because the commission on its own is now looking at a number of other factors which were not considered during the assessment. So when you weigh these factors bring them into account, you will find that there was reason to consider that particular individual.
No, but allow me, please. No, I really have to get to the bottom of this because we started off with the leadership competency model. So I'm trying to understand what new information suddenly makes a candidate suitable for a position that the leadership competency model initially said they were not suitable for.
Okay. So in our consideration of all the information available, we looked at things like command experience, etc. I can tell you for that one in particular, because I particularly discussed that. And there was consensus among the commission based on the particular experience of that individual and his command ability. He should be considered. And this is beyond, now beyond the leadership competency model. This is the commission in its own discretion, its own consideration.
I have to question then the timing of that type of additional information being now put into the picture and why that level of assessment wasn't applied at an earlier stage, and was that even, but command experience, was that even factored into other applicants as well?
Simply because at the assessment stage, we had a fairly fixed framework. There was a framework that was designed, and we had a fairly fixed set of questions to assess.
Final question. You indicated initially that you were perfectly satisfied with the competency profile defined by the firm that you hired because of their expertise in this manner. Yet at the final stage, the commission on its own comes up with something that they feel is superior. So I am a bit concerned, and frankly, I'm confused.
Line of questioning that the chairman raised, and I want to take it a little further, but it also has a relevance to this. Let me begin, unlike my colleagues, in saying that I am not confused. And I would ask you a simple question. It relates to the chairman earlier. The chairman raised an issue, and these are my words, not the chairman's words, whether or not members of the commission participating in the first level, because I don't want to get into stage 1, 2, 3. There's a level with the KPMG. Whether or not members of the commission, albeit one, I think, participating in that could have, my words, colored or prejudiced any discussion because of prior knowledge of a candidate or a set of candidates. That was the question. Earlier there was an answer. In light of this recent discussion now from the member for Labre, where you have the constitutional right to consider all information, you can consider all information at your quote-unquote final stage. The commission, it is without the KPMG. The commission, there is still the possibility, if that is open, there's still the possibility of some type of prejudice or bias, by definition, because the commission would have been involved with sitting officers of a certain level at least, in matters of discipline, appointment, transfers, and would have had the files, to use that term. So the bias could be at the first level, given the involvement with KPMG. It could be at the last level, for which you are in a way clothed by the law for any bias there. So to me, it's not the issue of the prejudice in the second part, apparent as it may be, but in that first part, whether or not the one person, and let me put it now in simple words, if you have a panel of 5 people or an interviewing panel, whatever, KPMG and PSC, would one person be placed there, create a problem that they would have influenced, prejudice, bring a bias towards any candidate or set of candidates for or against, and simply that?
Happy to take that question. The answer is no, because the PSC members were involved in 2 aspects of stage 1. The first aspect was a panel interview where it was 1 of 5 people, which even if there was a perception of bias, it could have only contributed to 20% of the entire marks for the panel assessment. And in the role play analysis, it was 7 members, of which 1 member was a PSC member who was invited. 1 in 7 is about 14% of the entire marks that would have contributed if that person would have been totally and completely biased.
So,
in the real world, clean as that, but we heard your submission. This is Dr. Monilal.
Mr. Sukram, again, without trying to get into any of the details and candidates and so on, it appears from the data that one candidate topped this list at both the KPMG level and the PSC level. Would that involvement would have made any fundamental difference in your opinion?
It would have made no fundamental difference to the entire process.
Thank you, Mr. Dialsingh.
Thank you. I am concerned. Let me deal with the last issue first. 20.4 of the contract between KPMG and the firm speaks about independence, objectivity. With all due respect, Mr. Sukram, I have a totally different view that a firm that is being paid $3.1 million to maintain independence and objectivity in the process will seek to involve its client, the Public Service Commission. It has nothing to do with weighting and percentages. It has to do, as Mr. George will tell you, what will the man in the Clapham bus think? The reasonable, ordinary man in the Clapham bus or in Trinidad context, what will the ordinary, reasonable man in the maxi taxi from Arima to Port of Spain think about objectivity and independence of the firm being paid $3.1 million on the terms of its contract to be independent and objective, engaging its client in the process? So I have a different view. That's one. Two, I have no doubt that this country owes a debt of gratitude to Commodore Franklin for his military service and to Mr. Ramkissoon for his police service. My first question had to deal with their HR competency and qualifications. Regardless of your 80 years experience, 86, it was then shocking to hear Commodore Franklin say to this committee that he saw no real difference between recruitment and selection. Commodore Franklin, with all due respect in the world to you as a military man that this country owes a debt of gratitude to, there is a world of difference in HR between recruitment and selection. Recruitment is when you advertise to the world for this thing, and then you start a screening process, eliminating as you come down. And this is the fruit of the poison tree, to use a legal term, that if the process is not managed by professionals from day one, because I would put it to you, Mr. Franklin, why did two persons who this country owes a debt of gratitude to, who have little or no executive recruitment training, who don't understand the difference between recruitment and selection, are now inserted into the process by KPMG?
That's the question. Who will answer that?
Okay, I will first try to clarify, because I interpreted the question about difference between recruitment and selection in a particular context. According to Member Dialsingh, that I will accept what he said, that there is a significant difference there, but the context in which I was interpreting when it was asked first, you're quite right. And I can tell you, apart from the vast military experience and training, which we get tremendous HR training. We don't walk out with a degree in HR, but in the military, it's all about HR. And I'm sure the chairman can tell you, because he has police experience. I have also served on several boards.
Mr. Franklin, just bear with me one second, with all due respect.
Yeah. So,
if you had a prescription to fill for your granddaughter who was terminally ill, and you took it to a pharmacy, and it was dispensed by somebody who had 40 years experience, but was not a pharmacist,
I would be concerned.
Exactly. Thank you. I wasn't finished. I wasn't finished. Yes. No, let's not make light of the difference between experience and qualifications. Mr. George, in accepting responsibility for the process, responsibility means, and to use your own words, oversight. In my view, it does not mean insertion into the nitty-gritty of the process. And that's where the roles became clouded between stage 1 and stage 2, where you cannot eliminate bias and all of that. Secondly, and the question is now, persons who were assessed for DCOP and were then upgraded to COP were persons who applied for COP considered for the post of DCOP. Were persons who applied for the position of DCOP, for COP, no, for DCOP, and were considered for COP, were persons who were considered, who applied for COP, also considered for vice versa for DCOP?
Perhaps I'll answer that. The, part of the process was role fit. At stage 1 of the assessment, there was a role fit, and I think you have the marks. You would see a score for role fit. And stage 2, there was also role fit. At each stage, they determined this person, and it was read out a while ago. So the answer to your question is yes. We asked everyone of them, those who applied for COP, those who applied for DCOP, should the commission, in its own judgment, consider you better suited in another position? What were your views? We just got that. We did that for the commission's information. When we come now...
And you were saying all the 12 were offered that option?
We didn't offer them an option. We asked a question to get a response. That's all. We made no promises. We did not make an offer. Neither did we solicit them to change an application. Why then did you ask that question? Because in...
Ask it again.
Yes,
the mic was off, just for the record. Why then did you ask the question?
Because in doing the role fit, we saw some individuals showed the propensity or the ability to be in another role. Yes?
So, okay.
I don't know if Mr.
Okay, let me just ask before I give way to Mr. Singh. Let me just,
Yeah.
on this matter, let me just ask before I give way promptly to Mr. Singh. Were there, in stage 1 and 2 of the assessment process, interviews?
Yes.
So in stage 1 of the assessment process, there were interviews?
The assessment center, stage 1, there was a panel interview, as well as in stage 2 of the assessment center. The stage 1 panel interview was with 20 individuals.
And in those interviews, members of the commission sat in? One member of the commission sat in. And in the second...
In the stage 1?
In stage
1 member.
1 member.
And in stage 2, that was the PSC's panel.
Just now?
Yes.
No, just now. I'm talking about the assessment.
Yes.
There were 2 stages of it.
Yes.
And after that, the commission met on its own to consider the wider questions that you addressed to Ms. Olivier a while ago.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I'm asking, in stage 1 of the assessment process, there were interviews.
Yes, 1 interview.
1 interview, each candidate.
Yes.
20 of them.
Yes.
And 1 member of the commission sat.
Correct.
In stage 2 of that assessment process, were there interviews?
Yes, 1.
1 interview. And another member of the commission sat.
3 members of the commission.
3 members. Who were the 3 members of the commission sat in the second stage of the assessment? And then after that, the entire commission sat to consider the larger questions.
Not an interview, though.
Not an interview.
No.
Right. Just before I give way, would you say that the assessment, stage 1 and 2, as distinct from the final wider consideration, which is your constitutional remit in the view of this committee, would you say that stage 1 and 2 assessment would you describe it as being technical assessing technical competencies?
In police, when you say technical, what do you mean?
I mean, where you're looking at certain skill sets that are necessary for the competency model in a technical way. The kind of thing, yes, that the kind of thing, and along the lines of the HR concepts, the kind of thing that KPMG was hired to do. Right. Would you describe that, Mr. Franklin, for our benefit, as being an assessment of technical competencies? Role fit and all of that. Role fit for DCP, role fit for commissioner. Would you describe that? Would you describe the assessment process as assessing technical competencies?
Right. The competencies identified, and this was everybody, we assess everybody on these competencies. Executive policing skills, leading strategic change, leading the workforce, decision-making, working with others, serving the public, managing performance, professional policing skills, operational management, business policing skills, and professionalism.
The elements by list, would you agree that those are technical skills?
If you want to call them that.
Would you call them that?
No, I wouldn't. I would call
what would you
policing,
call them?
Policing matters, policing skills are technical.
All right, okay then. Let me ask the gentleman from KPMG the same question just before I give way to Mr. Singh. Would you consider, given your firm's expertise, that assessment, based on the identifiable elements that we just heard from the Commodore, would you say those were an assessment of technical skills or competencies?
No.
What?
I would say it would be competencies, not technical competencies. Technical competencies has a different connotation. I would not say that because leadership and soft skills are not technical.
So you mean IT skills, engineering, geology
skills,
and so on are more technical skills?
Correct. So there's a difference.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I want to take up the point about whether or not, and it has not been asked before, whether or not any members of the commission had any kind of working relationship, familial relationship, or any kind of relationship with any of the applicants, and if so, whether or not that was declared.
I can answer that because that would have taken place at stage 1 and 2 of the assessment center. At stage 1, the member of PSC disclosed a relationship of around 20 years ago of having worked with a particular, with that particular candidate, and there was no objection from the panel to recuse that person, having understood that it was 20 years ago. Secondly, one of the other members in the PSC who participated in the interviews, role play, also had a working relationship with one of the candidates, and that was about 10 or 15 years ago. He disclosed it, and there was no objection from the panel to ask him to recuse himself.
Chairman. So therefore, it was open. The open declaration of these interests, and it was it did not impact, as far as you are concerned, with respect to the working of the assessment center.
It was declared, and there was no impact.
Chairman, I want to piggyback on what the point raised by Member Nicole Oliveri. The question for me is that you have completed the exercise. The firm has completed its report. There is an assessment, there is a listing and an ascending order of the various candidates. So the commission now sits to create the order of merit. The question I have, as reflected by my colleague, is that how can a candidate who was not shortlisted in the superior category but was shortlisted in a subordinate category, jump from the subordinate category into the superior category. And you indicated that certain factors were taken into consideration. And we had previously that KPMG did a empirical base, a database, role play based scenario planning, and so on, a series of clearly what I call scientific assessment. What were the factors that allow for this quantum leap from one to jump from one category into the next category?
I would like to ask Commissioner George if he can eloquently answer this question. Thank you.
Answer questions eloquently. That's not an issue at all. The point is, in relation to what we have as the order as redacted per the judgment of Justice Raj Kumar, it says, the firm shall ensure that the candidates are subject to best practice, security, and professional vetting. The firm shall submit to the Commission the results of its assessment process, a report on the assessment of the entire assessment process. In respect of the candidates referred to in subparagraph 1, the following documents: A, application of the candidate; B, biography or resume of the candidate; C, assessor's scores; D, assessor's feedback; E, medical examination report; and F, security and professional vetting report. So I will give you an example. Let's look at item F. In terms of the security and professional vetting report, when that came to us from the results of the KPMG assessment, and here I would respectfully beg to differ with something Commodore said earlier when he said that we accepted what the firm presented to us in terms of their results. It was not always accepted. One commissioner felt that the security and professional vetting report from KPMG appeared to be woefully lacking and inadequate. So in those circumstances, it was raised amongst ourselves as commissioners that, look, there ought to be a proper and more detailed security and professional vetting, and we then took the decision as a commission to send out letters requesting from certain bodies additional information in relation to the candidates, so that way we could have a better perspective. When those reports came back, certain things excited the imagination of some of the commissioners, whereby we felt that, look, these things could be, points that ought to determine whether someone ought to remain in a certain position or not. So I'm just using that as an example to show that when we sat in our own mature deliberations, we had to still own the process and take responsibility. So therefore, if we felt that we were not satisfied, and as I said, because one member raised that issue, we were able as a commission to come to a decision that, look, we ought to have a further inquiry into the professional and security vetting, and then based on that result, we were then able to make a change.
No, I want to follow through. I don't want to be like Coitus interrupted. Yeah, Mr. George, I need a level of specificity with respect to this particular candidate J. This candidate was in the DCOP category. Mm-hmm. The candidate now in the order of merit, and when we contemplate that the order of merit, the recommendation of the commission was that this person jumped from this category into the second location in the order of merit, number 2. Now, what were the factors that influenced that?
Well, we are guided by the legislation as always. If you look into the legislation under subsection E, it says, the commission shall then take into account all information on the candidate and thereafter establish an order of merit list. So, notwithstanding the fact that you may have been presented with a list or 2 separate lists from the firm, we were never at all to be guided or dictated by
I agree with all
what
of
the
that.
firm has put. No,
Chairman.
I must be clear on this. I must be clear on this, because it goes also and dovetails to the question that was raised earlier by the chairman of these proceedings in relation to the aspect of bias. When one considers the question of bias, because he wanted to ask about our previous knowledge of candidates and previous interactions with candidates, and I think it's important for the national community not to leave that issue unanswered, for it to ferment, into, all different, connotations. We are again guided by the law when we look at what you consider in terms of how you assess bias, and you look at how the courts have treated the question of bias. In the case of Nankisoon Boodram versus the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, I'll just tell you this. It's a Privy Council decision, and it says it's not just the question that bias may be possible, but if there is an actual and real prejudice that can occur. So I just wanted to say that. So in answer to your question, yes, it was possible. So when you ask if it is
you
possible,
answer in every question, but not with the specificity required of my question, Commissioner George.
Okay, well,
what is the unique factors when you take all into consideration that allowed for this leap to take place?
Well, as I said, we relied on what the legislation provides. And the thing is, if you wish to go into all the elements of the results, then I think the reports are before you. So we looked at everything. Thank you. I am glad the honourable member has mentioned that. We did, and it was recommended by one member that we ought to get a legal opinion in relation to that. And the legal opinion which we received from senior counsel indicated that it is a factor that can be taken into consideration, but it does not ab initio debar that candidate from being considered for selection.
Based on what you submitted and found the need to request further professional and security vetting, and when I say you, I mean pluralistic application.
Indeed. Yes, we understand that.
The Commission found it necessary to seek an amplification, further security and professional vetting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it received additional information that it did not have in the first blush. Am I correct?
That's correct.
It is therefore correct for this committee to accept that KPMG's submission on professional and security vetting was inadequate. It was not thorough.
Well,
Would that be a correct submission?
That was certainly the view of one commissioner.
Well, no, just a second.
When it was discussed, the rest of the commissioners accepted that, and then we sent out for.
So now I'm talking about today, with hindsight, that we are clear that the additional information made a lot of difference and required legal advice. It would be correct, would the Commission agree, it would be correct to say that the initial submission from KPMG was inadequate. It did not tell the whole story about your candidates, and pertinent information only came after.
Well, maybe it may have told the truth, but not the whole truth.
I thank you very kindly.
And nothing but
I thank you very much. There's one other question I must ask before I give way to Mr. Dayal Singh. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. My Mr. Mitchell, such a quiet and dignified man. I almost forgot him. He's not noisy like some of my other colleagues. Yes, Madam Chair, I want to ask another question here. In the second interview, Mr. Franklin, I think since you mentioned it, you should take the question. In the second interview of which you spoke, which took place in the last stage or the second stage of the assessment. Am I correct? There were 3 members of the commission sitting in that panel. Am I correct?
Correct.
3, eh? Am I correct?
You are correct.
How many KPMG personnel sat in that panel with 3 police commission members?
2.
2. In other words, it would be correct to discern and to state that the preponderance of power or brain or thought or interview, and 16% or much percent, the preponderance of members on that interview panel in that second stage of the assessment was members of the Police Service Commission. Would that be correct to say?
That's correct.
Let me give way to Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On that point, and I'm staying on the question of bias, and I'm not getting into quantification of bias, whether it be 20%, 14%, or 50%. You've accepted that the police, or you have given evidence that the Police Service Commission, as constituted then, was involved in the appraisal of certain acting officers who became candidates. You've also said that you were a part of the assessment process, and you were a part of the process all throughout, an integral part. We're talking about real or apparent bias. Do you accept, to the fair-minded observer, that there may be an instance of real bias where the persons who made it onto the order list were the incumbents, and therefore the reason why they may have made it onto the order list was because the Police Service Commission would have been acting to justify its previous good appraisal reports when it appraised the incumbents?
Far from it. The question of bias would hardly have entered into, or would not have entered into the assessment process. Because we had very specific questions.
Talking about the appearance of bias.
Not even that, I would think. In my opinion, not even that. We had very specific questions that did not leave room for subjectivity. It was about, and we had parts of the answers that we expected to hear from the candidate and expect him to elaborate on. Perhaps KPMG could...
What do you mean sorry, could you just amplify that answer? You had questions that you expected the candidates to give you?
Let me defer to KPMG to outline how the questions were framed up and the answers.
Thanks, Commodore. The questions were standard questions designed to test every candidate's ability under the same leadership competency models. It was different question. It was geared toward the second stage of the process, was geared towards real issues in the TTPS and how these candidates, if they were to be successful, would deal with these issues. They were given weightings like the first stage, and also in the first stage, there were key questions and there were elements sought in the answer. There was no right or wrong answer, but there were elements that we were looking for when it comes to the candidates answering the question. Stage 1 of the panel interview was no different from stage 2. So when Commodore said the issue of bias or apparent bias would not arise, is because all of the panelists sitting down on the other side of the table would score fairly based on the elements that we are looking to see. if candidates provided a different picture out of the box thinking, that was taken into consideration in determining the score. After that scoring process happened, all the panelists sat together and had a discussion about how this interview went. There was commonality in thinking with regards to where there was consistency in answers. So the whole process itself went through a rigor that could have been tried and tested anywhere in the world.
Right, but when I'm looking at the scores, final scores, there are persons who score 1 point more than the other. And when you take into consideration that persons on the Police Service Commission who had previous contact, in terms of appraisals of these individuals, I'm asking again whether, in your opinion, to the fair-minded observer, whether there could be apparent bias.
Let me take it to the extreme, Member Mitchell. If there were to be bias at the order of merit stage, there could be 100% bias. This is where the commissioners decide on their own with all information who would be their top pick for these positions. So to say that they would be biased to get to point B, where they would have an order of merit list, where they themselves are the ones to make a judgment, is chalk and cheese.
But certainly we can't be justifying bias. That's point number one. And secondly, that's another question, because on the order of merit list does not exactly mirror the scores, the final scores as submitted by KPMG. So can I ask, what other considerations might the Commission have taken to come up with the order of merit list?
In coming up with the order of merit list, several things were taken into consideration. Contextual factors, apart from how they would have scored at the first stage and the second stage, because there was a combined score at first stage and second stage. And as the Commodore said, command control and respect, and so there was experience taken into account. And in the case of there was also the security vetting piece taken into account. So that we had to look at all the information then that we possibly had at that point in terms of deciding on the order of merit list. In terms of candidate J, that has been referred to.
I want your full answer for this record as to what matters would you have taken into account to design the merit list. You have identified experience, you have identified security vetting. Are there any other factors? Because the order says, after the assessment by the firm, the information or their findings are passed to you, the files, the assessor's report, and all of that. And the law says, and then, I stress on the word, then, taking into account all other factors, you, the Commission, will design an order of merit list, agreeing with Mr. Mitchell and all of us here that KPMG or the firm must never design the order of merit list. Whatever they say to you or give to you, it is for you to design the order of merit list. That's what I understand Mr. Rajkumar to have said.
Yes.
But it's police commission work.
Yes.
Not KPMG or anybody else. Not minister, nobody else. Now, we therefore want to know what are the factors you took into account in that final assessment. I call it assessment with a small a. After the then, After you heard from KPMG and they gave you their scores, you had to design a merit list. What are the factors? Clearly first, experience, security vetting, what else?
Okay, there were 3 broad areas: command ability, police service experience,
where is that? Yes?
security vetting,
Yes?
integrity, risk, vision/future strategic planning,
Yes?
and of course the 7 suitability criteria, which were skills and ability, qualification, training and competence, work performance, personal qualities, potential for future development, contributing to team performance.
As one of the 7?
Yes, so many of them.
And anything else after that 7?
And background.
Background. Now, just before I give way to Mr. Mitchell for his follow-up question, and then Dr. Monilal, when you say risk, what did you mean by that, risk, that category? What did you mean by that? I am not sure.
I'd like to pass to the Commodore to answer.
Why don't you?
Because he will be able to do it more eloquently.
But you were all trained by KPMG.
This had to do with his military training.
No, let's be serious. Just a second. Gentlemen, ladies, gentlemen, just a second. This committee was told that all the persons, and Madam Gomes, we know you were one of them, in this final stage. In fact, you took part in the second interview in the assessment stage. You were a member of the panel, 3 members. But we were told as a submission on the record here that you all were all trained, and we heard about 86 years experience. Yours might make it 200. But the point is, we would like to know, what did you understand? You were part of this. You must tell us. What did you understand by the meaning of the word risk? Unless if the Commodore has a different interpretation than you.
Yes.
No, just a second, Mr. Commodore. Hold on, please. I am asking a member of the Police Service Commission, the former chairman, who led the team and who was part of this.
I think we get entering into the realm, Mr. Chairman, of badgering now,
No, I'm sorry, Dad.
So, you're entering into this realm. If the panel says,
I don't know how you're
if the panel says that the answer to this committee is better suited from a member of the Police Service Commission, then we should allow that, and then you can return.
I appreciate what your point is. I appreciate your point. However, the public is aware that all members of the Police Service Commission participated in this. And every member should be able to tell me what was meant by one of the criteria taken into account. And therefore, I would hear the Commodore, but I would like to hear the chairman of the commission say, what did she understand by the term risk? Madam Gomes.
I have no answer for you.
Thank you. Commodore.
Okay. Risk was part of a subgroup that read security vetting, risk, and integrity. And whether the individual or selecting an individual in a particular position would have posed a risk
okay,
to the management of
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Mitchell, and then Dr. Munilal, and then Mr. Dayal Singh, and then Mr. Singh. Thank you very kindly, in that order.
Thank you. Just 2 quick questions, Mr. Chairman. So the 3 board areas of command ability, police service experience. Am I to assume, one, that someone who was not a member of police service would have been significantly disadvantaged under this consideration? And secondly, I'm reading a document here where it is stated that a mathematical formula was applied where each candidate was given a score based on his position on a list generated by each commissioner using the criteria just identified by you, Dr. Gomes. I want to ask, what was the mathematical formula? Could we be provided with that? Who designed the mathematical formula? And who applied the mathematical formula? Please.
If I may be permitted, I could answer that. Because you're at the stage where you have your objective criteria from the firm, you have their assessment, their scores, their raw data, the empirical evidence that you've gotten in terms of your professional and security vetting, you now enter into the realm where the commission members, based on our own individual experiences, our knowledge, our background, the reasons why we were chosen and placed on the commission in the very first place, we now apply that using the guidelines as set out in the legislation to determine whether we think these persons should be on the order of merit list and in what particular order, because at no time is the firm to dictate to us what the order of merit should be. So therefore, what we did, using the criteria and using what the legislation sets out, we then created our rank and we had our lists individually. How then do you determine in terms of who you should choose from one list as opposed to another? So what we did then, we came up with an idea whereby you gave a grading of, for instance, if you had 4 lists and you had one name appearing twice at the top of the list, then that would give you a score of, we used 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in that basis. So in other words, you would get 10 points for that name appearing twice there. If the name appeared once, second place, then you would get 4 additional points. And that's how you worked it. So you worked a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 coming down, and you used the lists that were generated by the commissioners going across, and you came up with the raw scores, which were then tabulated to give you your number 1 candidate, your number 2 candidate, your number 3 candidate, your number 4 candidate. Having gotten that, we then now had discussions as to, okay, how do we formalize this order of merit list in terms of submission? And that's where further discussions took place. And at that point, you had the issue of the security and professional vetting, which had come up in the recently acquired information. And as I explained on the last day, there were 2 members who felt that in the interest of justice and in following our dictates and mandates as per the Constitution, we ought to have an investigation into the matter relating to that candidate. And we were not at all seeking to be dictated to by any third party who may have requested or suggested anything in terms of what we should do. We were of the view, 2 members were of the view that we ought to have an investigation. That vote went 2-2. There was a casting vote. And then for the finalization of the order of merit list, the vote ended up 3-1.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. But I'm focused really on the mathematical formula. And I know you would have tried to explain it, but I think perhaps we need it in writing. I'm referring to a letter dated 22nd February to the secretary of this committee, written by Ms. Maraj, where acting DPA, where it is stated that a mathematical formula was applied. I want to know who developed the mathematical formula, who applied it, because we have the results and I wouldn't mention the results, but we have the results subsequent to the application of the mathematical formula, but we don't have the mathematical formula. We need that so that we can determine as a committee whether it was skewed or logical and fair. Can we be provided with the mathematical formula?
For information, my understanding is that it is called the border count method. It was something Mr. George brought to the commission, as he explained to you just now.
Thank you. Members, I have just 3 or 4 brief questions. The first one is just for clarity and for the record. At that final stage of deliberations of the Police Service Commission, were there any interviews conducted with one or more of the candidates being considered? I think that is a simple enough question.
No, there were no interviews conducted.
Could I ask another question? Now, I am not part of my question. I'm not concerned with the grading. I'm not a second examiner or an external examiner. I'm concerned with a fundamental issue that seemed to be troubling the committee. And that second stage, when earlier the chairman raised the matter, and we were told there were 3 members of the Police Service Commission out of a 5-member panel. Could I ask, that stage was still within the domain of the KPMG? And what would have accounted for that composition of that panel at that time?
Okay, that's a very good question. And the answer to your first question is yes, it would have been part of the assessment center, 2 stages. The second part, answer to the second part of your question is that the PSC and KPMG agreed that it will be beneficial for the PSC to be more involved in this stage of the process, because they have to make the ultimate decision in creating the order of merit lists. The PSC could have been easily disadvantaged, just like how Parliament and the House of Representatives was unclear about the process and just had a score sheet and an assessment score to make a decision. The PSC could have easily been in that position had they not been a part of the process. And to clarify a point that was made earlier, would seem to suggest that the PSC conducted the recruitment process. It is KPMG who conducted the recruitment process. It was not the PSC.
Could I ask, again for the record, because we have heard so much about the qualifications of the members of the Police Service Commission. Could you tell us just briefly, without calling anyone name, of course, the qualifications of the members of the KPMG who were involved in this matter?
Okay. Well, I am with KPMG since 1991. I've been recruiting people for over 20 years now. I recruit partners all over the region in the Caribbean at executive level. I recruited in CEO positions and corporate. We do quite a lot of executive recruitment. My qualifications, I'm a certified accountant, ACCA qualified, a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm also a certified general management accountant out of the UK, and also a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of the UK, FCCA. Abigail De Freitas has a BSc in Strategic Management, a partner for advisory, BSc with honors, and years of experience in doing executive recruitment. Abigail runs our management consultant side of the practice in KPMG in Trinidad and Tobago. We also had Ian McPherson, who is an ex-chief of police of the UK. He actually commanded the UK Metropolitan Police Service with over 32 divisions and 36,000 police officers. Our police service comprised of around 7,000, just about 7,000 police officers. Ian was a subject matter expert and a technical consultant to the team. He would have been one who also trained the members in the second stage of the interview process. We are the ones who basically ran the process and the assessment center for the PSC.
Could I go back to an earlier issue for absolute clarity for us? The troubling matter has always been this involvement of the Police Service Commission, and you all have really explained several elements of that. both the legal issue, the operational issue, what you thought to be your duty, and so on. Was it possible at any time for members of the Police Service Commission participating in the early stages with the KPMG to have brought information into that discussion that would have in any way influenced a decision one way or another, bearing in mind that the very Police Service Commission, the commissioners, later would have their own domain. They would have their four walls to themselves, and they could have brought any information they want, for that matter, into those discussions which are supported in the law. But would it have been possible at those stages early for members of the commission or a member to bring in files or to bring in something to influence one way or another?
So I would answer your question in two parts. One, yes, it is possible, but two, it did not happen. We maintained independence and objectivity with regards to the decision making. We stand by every single score that went on that table and can defend it based on the process that was undertaken, based on the methodology that was used in determining the scores. So that did not happen at any stage of the process.
A series of short questions. Mr. Sukram, you have muddied the waters now even more. All this expertise that you have in executive recruitment and subject matter experts, why then did KPMG feel it necessary to bring in members of the Police Service Commission into the process?
It was the PSC's process. The law gives the PSC the power. There's no definition anywhere in any legislation or in the contract that says who should comprise the interview panel.
Good. So both parties were intimately involved, even though you have all this experience. Fine. That's one. Two. We heard that the interview panel at stage 2 comprised of 5 persons, 3 from the PSC and 2 from KPMG. Again, if you have all this experience, why was the panel skewed in terms of numbers to the PSC? Don't you think it's a dereliction of duty on the part of KPMG, who is paid $3.1 million taxpayers' dollars to manage a process to cede authority by having a greater number of persons from the Public Service Commission who did not have the necessary expertise and qualifications?
So it's not the Public Service Commission, but the Police Service
Commission, I'm sorry.
But I'll answer your question. No, it did not compromise the process in any way. It did not compromise the independence of the scoring. I went through length to explain how the process was, what were the questions, what was the element sought in the answer, how we corroborated after in terms of all the panelists come together and let's talk about how this interview went, how this candidate performed.
So you are happy?
And then scored. I am extremely happy that KPMG conducted this thing.
And can stand legal scrutiny?
I am sure it will.
Question to Mr. George. You said certain vetting excited certain members of the commission. Besides applicant F, did the security and professional vetting of any other candidate so excite or titillate the commission?
Yes.
Yes? Could you tell me by letter which one?
In relation to candidate B, there were certain things that appeared which showed that there had been certain decisions made.
We put in a little caveat. It was that we recognized, particularly on the submission of the acting DPA, quite properly and wisely, she indicated to this committee, just to remind members, that we are here because the House of Representatives asked us to conduct this inquiry. But that inquiry had to do with a very limited number of persons, not all the persons whose initials we now identify them by. And I want us to be sensitive because it is only those that came to us that we are now contemplating.
Okay.
We want to do or say nothing to jeopardize or to give advantage to those who are not immediately before us. In light of that, I do not know whether you might want to answer the question using the identification you have used, Mr. George, but you are particularly skillful counsel.
Well, I know, but
you'll find a way.
The honourable member seemed to want...
No, he wants... the question is a legitimate one, but see if you can answer it without...
So, this specific name.
Yeah. All I would
there were
say,
others.
In the circumstances, yes.
Thank you. Last question to former chairman, Dr. Gomes. In response to Member Mitchell's questions, what motivational factors at the last stage did the commission consider? And what was mentioned, commendability, vetting, and so on. But according to the order, vetting, professional and security vetting was supposed to have been done by the firm prior to any names coming to you. Why was that a factor at the very last stage? That is how you screen people out by best practice in HR. You do all that screening first, so when you have a short list, you don't have to do at the end of the process what you did at the very first, if you followed best HR practice. So the question is, why was professional and security vetting left for last and not for first?
The security vetting was not left for last.
But Chairman Gomes, former chairman, you said in response to Member Mitchell, when he asked what factors were considered at the last stage, your reply was 7 factors. You said commendability, vision, risk, whatever, and you said vetting. According to the order, vetting is supposed to be done very early by KPMG. And that is how HR works. That is how you recruit, select, screen. The question is, why was vetting, professional and security vetting, left for last?
Okay, Mr. Sukram wants to answer the question.
No, I'm asking you, because you are the former chairman who Mr. George said you all accept responsibility for the entire process, and you all inserted yourselves into the process.
We didn't insert ourselves into the process, so with all due respect, as dictated by the judgment or interpreted by the judgment, and senior counsel supported us on that and gave us that opinion. That is how we were so involved in the process.
Mr. George said last time, and I have his verbatim here, now there's a difference between participation and oversight. I said I can see oversight. Mr. George, we carried out both roles, participation and oversight. Your commission, by Mr. George's own words, participated in the process.
Yes, I agree with that.
Good. No, I want an answer to my question. Why was the security vetting and professional vetting, according to your own submission, left for final consideration and not follow HR best practice and be done earlier in the process?
The quick answer is that KPMG did security vetting earlier, and there was a commission member who was not satisfied and wanted every stone unturned, and that's why we went back at the end. That's the quick answer.
Thank you.
Now.
So KPMG was deficient.
It was a very good thing that that commissioner wanted no stone unturned, because it revealed things that was not revealed before. It was significant. Hold on. I have a couple questions, but I'm prepared. Yes, I'm prepared to give way to Mr. Mitchell, who swore that he had a quick one on this matter. Please.
2 quick ones. To Mr. Sukram, earlier you indicated that during the process, 1 or 2 members would have indicated to KPMG either a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest, where the member of the Police Service Commission would have worked or interacted with certain candidates some years back. Did KPMG accept that indication by the member of the Police Service Commission, or did KPMG investigate further to determine whether that relationship was a continuing one or whether the relationship was closer than indicated by the Police Service Commission? And I ask this because KPMG, as you've said, you maintained your independence, and you found that you had a responsibility to maintain the integrity. That's that. And the second question is, can you, Madam Gomes, please indicate in writing to this committee which opinion and where in the opinion it is indicated to you that the Police Service Commission had a role and had the responsibility to play a direct role in the assessment process? So I'd like that in writing. And Mr. Sukram, if you could just answer the previous question.
Yeah, with regard to the disclosure of the relationship, the answer to your question is no. It was disclosed at the point in time of the interview. And based on the information disclosed, we didn't see it fit to conduct investigations as to any current relationships with any potential candidates or candidates.
In accordance with your ruling that after D.L. Singh, it would have been me, but notwithstanding my colleague came before me. My good friend, the professional and security vetting, that was done by KPMG.
Yes, the PSC engaged us to do eight specific background checks, and I want to go back. It is not woefully inadequate or insufficient. We were contracted and mandated by the PSC to do 8 specific background checks, and that is what we did.
Could you, for the purposes of the audience listening and for our own benefit, indicate what were those 8 background checks?
Okay, it was reference checks, job performance checks in terms of evaluations, credit checks, financial checks, good standing with financial institutions, security checks, certificate of character, and all those things to determine if there's a conviction in line with Legal Notice 218, existing and closed complaints that would have been the PCA who would have reported matters existing or closed, education verification in terms of their suitability, their qualifications, and whether it is in fact on paper, and medical checks. Those were the 8 background checks that we were contracted and mandated to do, Mr. George.
Thank you. I think that, Chairman, through you again, the role of the Police Complaints Authority. I want to ask members of the Commission, was there any specific allegation made against any member, any of the candidates by the Police Complaints Authority? And what did you do in response to that?
Yes, in terms of the response from the Police Complaints Authority, we did get feedback from them, and there were concerns, allegations on several candidates, one in particular that stood out. And in terms of that, we inquired, we needed to get the recommendation from them because it was not in the initial document that we got. We clarified that, and we got the recommendations as to what they thought that we should do in terms of taking disciplinary action on 3 particular areas. And then we had gotten a letter from that particular candidate clarifying those allegations, because the correspondence was also sent to them.
For purposes, the Police Complaints Authority made certain findings or allegations.
Yes.
And that was conveyed to the particular candidate.
Was conveyed to the particular candidate by the Police Complaints Authority because this was something that happened in 2011.
And did you give, for purposes of your own looking at all the factors in order to create the merit list, did you give that particular candidate the opportunity to be heard or the opportunity to respond?
Yes, the candidate did respond in writing to a letter that was sent.
By whom?
From me,
So
as chairman.
And that completed your professional and security vetting for that candidate?
Yes, it completed it.
It is that you are telling us that the Police Complaints Authority, and for those who don't know, this is a body established under law to investigate police misconduct and serious police, well, misconduct generally. The Police Complaints Authority investigated a matter and then made a recommendation to the Police Service Commission in relation to a candidate. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
And the recommendation, based on the records we have read, was that the person be disciplined by you, who is responsible for disciplining commissioner and deputy. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Having received that from the Police Complaints Authority, while you are now engaged, first thing, would that have been the first time that you, the Police Service Commission, would have been learning about that matter?
If it was the first time in terms of while we're doing this selection process, this recruitment and selection process.
Would it have been, when the PCA intervened in this selection, would it have been the first time that the Commission had become aware of an investigation and a recommendation for disciplinary proceedings?
Yes, this was the first time.
So once it came to your knowledge, you said a moment ago in answer to Mr. Ganga Singh that you contacted the officer.
I was initially contacted by the police.
I'm not talking about him and the PCA, I'm talking about you, the Commission. Once it came to your knowledge, you contacted the officer who was part of your contemplation in a selection for 2 offices. Am I correct?
Yes.
And you raised the matter with him. Am I correct?
Yes, we raised it in writing.
Let me ask, was the matter before your determination investigated by you as a commission as recommended by the PCA?
No, in terms of the timing of everything, we got that information from the PCA in, I have the dates.
But the answer is no.
No.
So as it stands today, that officer, don't call no name, was one of the persons that you put on the short list. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as it stands today, that matter has not yet been investigated by you as recommended by the PCA. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. Let me ask another question.
With your leave.
Just a second, please. Just a second, please. Mr. Ramkissoon, could you just allow this committee to do its work unperturbed, please? We will seek your intervention at the appropriate moments. Mr. Suk Ram, you told us boldly that there could have been bias in that last stage if it had to be or if the commission wanted to be biased. You told us that, didn't you, earlier today?
I think anybody could be biased in everything.
Mr. Sukram, just... do you recall saying that?
I recall saying that.
Right. In which case, do you, Madam Chair, Mr. George, the lawyer on the commission, oh, by the way, members of the commission are appointed having been possessed of certain skills. Am I correct? I know that, but I'm speaking with you, Mr.
Yes.
Do you consider, all things considered now, taken into account, that because of the fact that the PSC could have been biased, especially in this last phase, without KPMG, that is precisely why the law was structured in the way it was structured, for an assessment to be done by a firm independently, though the commission maintaining responsibility under the Constitution. And let me ask a subsidiary question here. Since we agreed that, based on your earlier submission, Mr. George, that the commission was free to participate as well as exert oversight. Oversight alone, rather than intimate participation and scoring, would not have been a breach of the law, would it have been? Once you continue to accept it as your own and define the merit list, would it have been a breach of the law?
Certainly not. But the thing is, in regard to that oversight function, it would be remiss of us if we simply tried to do exactly what Mr. Sukram suggested, the sterile analysis of data they have presented without an appreciation for the personages who are appearing before you, to see them, to hear them, to see how they react, to see if someone is being evasive. These are things you can't capture in a score or a percentage or a mark. So that's the reason why the commission members, those who were trained, I was not one of them, but those who were trained felt it necessary to be there so that we can own the process. And that dovetailed with the advice that we received from senior counsel that we must always take responsibility for the entirety of the process.
Will you agree with me that that question of responsibility is a constitutional construct?
Of course it is.
Meaning, it is only the Police Service Commission under the Constitution that has the right to select and to determine who should be commissioned and who should not be. You understand? It's a constitutional construct.
Subject to the parliamentary.
Yes, just a second. In which case, Mr. George, would you agree, as I'm putting it to you now, that the commission can have had oversight of all the interviews, watch and listen to everything, and not participate in scoring, and still would not have been in breach of the law? Would you accept that?
Certainly, that's possible. That's possible.
And I'm asking now the main question on the basis of your answer of yes. Don't you think, as a lawyer on the commission, I'll direct it to Mr. Ramgi soon after, don't you think that that is precisely why the order was drawn in the way it was drawn? It would have allowed the Police Service Commission oversight, observation, all of that taking place under the PSC's gaze, the assessment done by the firm, and then, and I'm using the word of the order, and then the Police Service Commission, taking all things into account, decides on the order of merit list.
Well, with respect, Mr. Chairman, if we are to revert exactly to your words, the order as was drawn, you would recall that the honorable members of the parliament are the ones who sat and decided, and that order was prepared. That legal notice, however, was later struck down in certain material parts by the judge, so therefore we have to look at the redacted order.
That's what I'm talking about.
If you look at the redacted order, that's when we had our consultations with senior counsel, which I detailed in the previous sitting. We had 5 or 6 sessions with senior counsel.
Yeah, you said that.
And it was clear from our understanding of what he advised us, that we had to ensure that we owned the process, and it was entirely up to us.
All right, Mr. George.
Whether we participated in the manner that you spoke of, or whether we took the hands-off approach and did the oversight from a distance.
Let me assure you that the question I've just put, I had in my own contemplation the redacted version. And for the public who don't understand what you and I mean by redacted, the Parliament designed an order. It became the subject of legal scrutiny. It went before Mr. Justice Rajkumar. And on the basis of his observations on the constitutional power of the Police Service Commission and its power alone, he amended the order to ensure that it read in terms that it is only the Police Service Commission who has that power. That's what we mean by redacted. So the question I put a while ago to you took into full account as a lawyer myself, the redacted version. So let me ask it one more time. I'm talking about the redacted version, the part redrafted by Mr. Rajkumar.
Yes.
Would you say that you would not have been in breach of the law, redacted, if you had had oversight without participating in scoring, be present, observe the nuances, observe the body language, observe all of that. And when finally you had to use the word of the order, it is after all of that, I'm just going to quote, the order, sections 1, 2, and 3, and I'm talking about 3D, which reads, after all of that, your observation, you're listening to the interviews, you're assuming it as your own under the constitutional authority of which we just agreed, and all of that, without scoring, Mr. George. And D now reads, the Commission, Police Service Commission, shall then take into account all information on candidates and thereafter establish an order of merit list. If you had done it like that, this is my question. If you had done it like that, do you consider that the Commission would have been in breach of the law, Mr. George?
No, but it was entirely up to us, yes, Honorable Chairman, because it's a simple, I can use a simple analogy. If you have, for instance, second markers at university who are in another jurisdiction, they are marking the scripts, the raw data, the scores. They are just assessing it from the empirical evidence there, as opposed to the lecturers who have spent time with the candidates, who have taught them, who have interacted with them, who have asked questions, saw the answers, saw the way they reacted to the questions, who would have a better appreciation of the merit and worth of a candidate more than just a raw score on paper. If it were just to be a raw score on paper, then it's something a firm could conduct, and there'd be no need for a Police Service Commission.
All right, I have one question before I give way to Dr. Monilal. I have one question before I give way to Dr. Monilal and then Mr. Dayal Singh. One question. Mr. Sukram, in fact, let me direct this to the chairman. Madam Chair. Mr. Mitchell asked a question, and in an answer we got partly from Mr. Sukram, it established to this member that one member of the commission had a personal and friendly contact and professional working relationship with one of the candidates who ended up on your order of merit list. Mr. Sukram, who you worked intimately with on this, told us that the commission did not go further. It relied entirely on the declaration of friendship made by a member. Mr. Mitchell specifically asked whether a further investigation was done to determine whether that relationship continued or whether it was in fact one that begun sometime before 10 years ago and ended 10 years ago. Mr. Mitchell asked whether an investigation was done to determine whether it continued, whether it was deeper, whether it was a business relationship, whether there were regular recent contacts, electronically and or otherwise. But that no further investigation was done. Reliance was placed purely on the declaration of the member, and the procedure continued apace. Do you consider, Madam Chair, that to be risky? Do you consider it to be in accordance with best practice, given the small pool that you were working with, the sensitivity of the issues? Your response, please.
The Commission did not hold any investigation of any relationship or deepening relationship, as you would put it. We relied on the integrity of Commission members in terms of how they proceeded and how they conducted themselves. We all took an oath of allegiance, and I would think that each of us, I have to trust everybody on the Commission, just as everybody on the Commission has to trust each other.
And you did that. And finally, you go next. Finally, this committee received a letter from a member of the public who, as well, was one of the participants in the process. We all have access to that correspondence, and I would ask, on the basis of it, simply, it suggested that at no time, and this would be someone whose name appears on the merit list, in fact, we received 2 letters from 2 applicants or participants, both of whom name appears on the merit list, which means they were part of the 20 and part of the 12. Both are suggesting, let me just clarify this, I know for sure one. Let me clarify this. Sorry. 1, thank you very much. The Secretariat is just clarifying this, was another letter I was talking about. Where that candidate, whose name appears on the list, has made it clear to this committee that he was never asked whether he would give consideration to the other office. So in other words, if he applied for DCP, he was never asked whether he would consider being commissioner. And if he applied for commissioner, he was never asked whether he would give consideration to being Deputy Commissioner of Police. How would you react to that letter, that suggestion from someone who appears on your merit list? What is your reaction to that?
Unfortunately, I have not seen the letter, but we asked everyone. I asked everyone. That was the last question that was asked. And every member of that, every candidate was asked that question. Every one of the 12 candidates. I am very, very confident in saying that.
I thank you very kindly. Dr. Munila.
Thank you. Just about 2 or 3 matters again. Mr. George, given your explanation earlier concerning the workings of the law and the workings of the commission as you saw it and your legal interpretation of it, I will ask simply put, the other side of the coin, do you believe that the process you followed by the holding on to the bone, so to speak, of the Police Service Commission, do you believe that that was correct in the law, that you followed the law?
As indicated from the opinion we received from senior counsel, it was clear that by owning the process, we had the right, the ability, and the responsibility to ensure that we did not just accept results from the firm, but that we were able to own it and say, look, this is ours. So if it meant that we needed to be there to observe, to participate, then of course we were fully within our rights, as we understood the explanations from senior counsel in that regard, to be part of owning the results of the process.
Mr. George, my second part of this, before I get to the real issue I want to. The issue arose, and I want the clarification, that you could have participated, but you did not have to score. But if you score, you clearly participate. Would that have made a difference?
I couldn't see how that could make a difference at all. I mean, I was not one of those who participated, but in defense of them and in deference to their integrity and their adherence to the process, I don't think that that could ever have made a difference, because you had an empirical set of values that you would use as your marking criteria. You had your scores set out. You had your parameters defined, and that's part of the training that they received. Of course, Commodore and Mr. Ramkissoon could elaborate more on those aspects. But within those guidelines, you had very narrow limits in terms of your margins of error. And once your margins of error are within the acceptable limits, then, of course, looked at a whole, the integrity of your process can be preserved and maintained.
Thank you. The second part of my three-part questioning. We have heard of, not to you, Mr. George, to members, all members, including you perhaps. We have heard of one incident where a member of the Police Service Commission, as a fact, had some prior relationship or acquaintance with a candidate. Is there any other member of this commission that would have worked or enjoyed a working relationship, a relationship of friendship, of familiarity, of family even, with any other candidate on the list of 20 which you started off with? I'm not concerned with the one or two to the end, but did the matter arise? Because this is a small society. Clearly, persons like Mr. Franklin have been in public life and defense force life for a long time. Did the matter arise as to anyone having relationship, and was that declared?
I perhaps.
I want to go back to an issue that arose because I have some questions on it. It is clear from the knowledge we have before us by way of letters. Yes?
I was just reminded that one of the candidates served with me.
One candidate served with you. Okay. Anybody reminded of anything again? I want to get back to that issue of the report, or a report from the Police Complaint Authority concerning one candidate. And we have the benefit of a document before us, an opinion, and some other papers as well. So I'm speaking with that knowledge, not specifically from what I've heard from you, that an incident that occurred in 2011 or 2012 or thereabout became the subject of a Police Complaint Authority investigation. Can anyone tell us when was that matter reported to the Police Service Commission? Because if you can't, we can ask the relevant, because I know we don't have a representative here. When was that matter reported? Because we know as a fact it arose in 2011 or 2012 or thereabout. But we understand today from you, former chairman, that the matter came to your attention only recently when you were conducting this exercise. Is that correct?
It came to us recently when we were conducting the exercise.
And that was as a result of you asking
yes, it was
the
as a
PCA to
result
give
of
us
asking.
an information and so on.
Yes.
But there's no information as to when that matter was reported to the Police Complaint Authority. When was the matter reported to the Police Complaint Authority? You would
in
not know.
2011, I mean...
No, that was when the incident is alleged to have occurred.
Yes.
When was it reported? We don't know.
No.
Okay, we will seek that clarification. Could you just, for the record, indicate the nature of the legal opinion on that matter? Because I understand that you also considered it. In fact, you considered the matter when it arose from the police complaint authority. Did you get legal advice on the matter, and if so, what was suggested? Should that person have been denied consideration?
We got senior counsel advice, and the advice indicated that it does not debar the candidate from the recruitment and selection process. It was not a criminal offense. But that we should take everything into consideration as the judgment has said.
Let me just clarify. Senior counsel advised on this specific issue that report, because it is a report from the police complaint authority, we don't know when the report or the complaint was made. We have no idea. But we know when it came to your attention during the process of your deliberations, your final deliberations. And the senior counsel advice was that it should not debar the candidate, although you should investigate or take action if you deem necessary. Is that correct?
Yes, and I believe Mr. Ramkissoon would like to add something to that. Is that okay?
Sure, Mr. Ramkissoon.
Much obliged. We had opinion from senior counsel to the effect that it was in relation to two candidates, that they should not be debarred, but we should consider it. And we had further legal opinion in relation to the recommendation from the PCA that we should not proceed in that to prosecute for an offense that is a disciplinary offense for more than 5 years may constitute an abuse of process. And we were given 2 cases, 2 judgments. And the commission itself had had given a written decision in a case called Sheldon, I think the name is Sheldon David versus the Commissioner of Police, to the effect, inter alia, that undue delay may constitute an abuse of process. So the commission considered, and we had a vote. We had a split vote, as my colleague mentioned last week, at the first hearing, a 2-2 decision, and then a casting vote.
So as it is now, just for more clarification on this specific matter, does the commission intend to proceed to investigate?
That's prejudicial to somebody.
At this point, there's no commission.
Okay, thank you.
Let me, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just be allowed, just for clarity, and I think for the sake of the public, the opinion indicated that the Commission should decide whether it wishes to act on the recommendation and take certain steps prior to finalizing the order of merit list. That was the legal opinion we received from senior counsel. And that's when the vote took place that Honorable Member Munilal was asking about.
But Mr. George's senior counsel also gave advice on the issue of delay and abuse of process.
No.
No,
in this opinion, no.
Was that the subject of any opinion?
There was an internal legal opinion that was procured, which gave views, but of course, at the end of the day, I think one would have regard to what senior counsel indicates in the opinion.
Right. Let me on that matter. We had, and the reason why I was able to say in whispering tones to my colleague, the answer was no, is because this committee requested the opinions that you had received in relation to this matter. And we all have copies of it. So I now hold a copy which was dated in respect to, it is dated the 22nd of January, 2018. It is directed to Dr. Maria Therese Gomes, Chairman, Police Service Commission. And that had to do with the recruitment and selection of offices of Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner. The question was, as stated here, regarding 2 candidates and so on, both of whom still appear on the merit list. And at page 5 of 5 pages of that opinion, in the third to last paragraph, I will read, leaving out names for reasons that we have already agreed. That third to last paragraph at page 5, it says, and I quote, "While the recommendation of the Police Complaints Authority does not debar or disqualify the candidate for consideration to the positions of Commissioner of Police or Deputy Commissioner of Police." This is the opinion of which you spoke, Mr. George? Yes,
yes, that's senior counsel's opinion. Yes.
While the recommendation of the PCA does not debar or disqualify candidate for consideration to the positions of COP and Deputy COP, it is not reasonably to be expected that the Commission would nominate a person who, in the view of the Commission, is or is soon to be subject of disciplinary action by the Commission. In my view, the Commission should decide whether it wishes to act on the recommendation of the authority to institute disciplinary action against the candidate prior to finalizing the order of merit list. Now, I have just heard Mr. Ramkissoon tell us in the face of this that the Commission had authorities about abuse more than 5 years, and it may constitute an abuse. As a lawyer must know, and that includes Mr. Ramkissoon, that would be a matter for a court to pronounce upon. And even the use of the word may will trouble the ordinary man in the Clapham, in the Arima maxi taxi, as in the English law they say in the Clapham omnibus. So that the submission by Mr. Ramkissoon that the Commission took into account that the matter may, at this stage, without dates, amount to an abuse as a reason for disregarding what the opinion just read, doesn't settle me. So I want to ask a question, Madam Chairman, or Mr. Franklin, Commodore Franklin. This has nothing to do with KPMG. This is order of merit list. If you, as you have submitted to the Parliament, or to the President, which the President submitted to the Parliament, which is why we are here, if you found that candidate X was best suited among all others, you named that candidate as number 1 on the COP list. As a layman, I would like to know, since you decided after KPMG and your work together commingled and produced reports, and then you sat by yourself and considered all manners of things and came up with a merit list. Your merit lists show the same candidate as recommended for the position of commissioner, and on top of that list, and then top of the list for deputy. I just want a simple explanation. Why did you block both? Well, I don't know if it's block, but why then did you, if you are saying, you ask persons, I'm coming to it, you ask persons whether you are willing to be considered to be COP, and the answer was yes. And after all that you did, you decided that person should be your recommendation to this Parliament as Commissioner of Police. Could you provide some explanation as to how you can also recommend that same person as top of the list for DCP as well, please? I just would like a common sense explanation.
And it is a very simple answer. If it were that the House of Representatives didn't affirm that that particular candidate that was nominated, then the person would be still eligible for DCP, being on that list.
Okay. Nicole Oliver, just now. Madam Oliver, that's all right. Madam Oliver. Just a moment. Just a moment. I've gotten an answer. We're happy with that.
Another issue in relation to the opinion.
No, Mr. Ramkissoon, just hold on. We're conducting our affairs in a certain manner around here. Madam Oliver, you have a question? I had my question answered. I'm fine. Yeah, you can.
I'd like to go back to when we dealt with the assessment center. Mr. Sukram, when you spoke about the assessment process, you indicated that there were standard questions and there were certain elements that you were looking for in the answer, in their response. And in terms of the scoring, well, then you could have objectively gauged how persons were scored because, in effect, you had a model answer. So my question is, would it be possible then for a candidate to have gotten a copy of this model answer and therefore prepare for the interview? Since they are standard questions, there may be standard questions that could be obtained by research. So how possible would it have been for candidates to have gotten access to that information and thus be better prepared to score well in the assessment?
So that's a very good question. It spoke about the confidentiality of the process and who kept the questions. KPMG was in retention of the questions and the answer set at all times. It did not leave KPMG office. It was under lock and key, and nobody else. And it goes back to how this process unfolded. You would have read in the newspaper time and time again that candidate A, B, and C was up in the running and up in the ranking. And when January 25th came, it was a different ball game. And that is testament to the confidentiality of the process and how well KPMG guarded that mandate.
My follow-up question is, given that all the interviewers then would have had to, score the candidates against the model answer, is it that at the point of the interview immediately before then this model answer was revealed to all members of the panel?
So let me make your question a little bit broader in that let's take the first day, for example. All the members of the panel would have been privy to the questions because it was one question set and one answer set. So any member of the panel could have easily taken or remembered a question for day 2 and day 3 and day 4 and day 5. But we had to rely on the integrity of the people. As the chairman said initially, it's an oath of allegiance that I think anybody taking such an oath should take it with the seriousness that they're actually taking it. So we had to rely on the integrity of the people on the panel.
Thank you very much. Now, I had raised a matter earlier and I asked a question, which I have now subsequently read in advice. The authority, the matter that we were referring to earlier, the authority began an investigation in 2012. We got asked a question, and I just want to put that on record. Now, could I just confirm, because I had some differing views earlier. There are 2 opinions before us. One is a senior counsel we clearly recognize. Is the second opinion that of Mr. Reginald Amor, senior counsel?
No. Not.
Because there's no signature of the attorney at law on this opinion. No. Is there a reason why we cannot?
It is not uncommon, especially in circumstances such as these, for it to be unsigned. And
but could I know the identity, or is that for some reason or another? We don't want to.
We don't want to reveal publicly the identity. We could leave it. Let's rely on the
okay,
thing.
Sure.
On
I have no. I mean, I could understand that as well. So I won't press.
Yeah, not the who, the what.
Yes, I won't press on the identity of the senior counsel. But I just want to read it again for the record here. In reference to the candidate for Commissioner of Police or Deputy, it is not reasonable to be expected that the Commission would nominate a person who, in the view of the Commission, this is the view of the Commission, is the subject of disciplinary action by the Commission. Now that is out, because the person was not the subject of disciplinary action. Or is soon to be the subject of disciplinary action. Would the commission have had any knowledge in your possession that this person is to be the subject of disciplinary action? Because what I'm asking is that when a matter comes, I don't know, and I'm sure members of the national community, many will not know. When a matter comes from the police complaints authority to you, recommending disciplinary action for one thing or another, what happens next? Is it automatic that you take action? Do you investigate? Do you inquire? I just want to clarify that process, because the letter to me is very clear. It is not reasonable to expect, the opinion, not reasonable to expect that you would nominate a person who, in your view, is the subject of disciplinary action, that is out, or who, in your view, is to be the subject of disciplinary action. Would you have had a view then that this person would automatically face disciplinary action?
If I could answer,
just the process.
Member, from what we had from the PCA, it was a recommendation that disciplinary charges be laid. It was very clear, very direct. There was no ambiguity there at all. However, what was suggested by one of the members would be that we ought to observe due process, give the candidate the opportunity ab initio to respond to the allegations and the recommendations of the PCA. Yeah. He's an attorney also.
Explain for the national community.
Yeah. At the start.
Yes,
at the start. Yes.
Ab initio.
And in those circumstances, it was felt that in fairness, there ought to be the question of whether this matter should be investigated. So it's not that the commission just took on board what the PCA said and decided, well, look, you must institute disciplinary proceedings. When it came to the vote on whether it should be, the question should be investigated as to whether we should proceed to disciplinary proceedings or not, that's when the 2-2 vote took place and the cast and vote was exercised.
Right, Mr. Mitchell, then Mr. Dial Singh.
Very quickly, just one question to piggyback on Dr. Munilal's
and let me
question.
say now, before, I'm so sorry, we had designed our program for completion at this time, 5:30, but I'm allowing 2 short questions, and then we bring this hearing to an end. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Where the Police Service Commission would have received such a report and such a recommendation, what is the standard operating procedure to be followed in such a situation? Because what you're describing is that you received a recommendation from the Police Complaints Authority, you allowed due process by allowing the candidate to respond, and it appears that you would have dismissed the recommendation. What is the standard operating procedure in such an instance?
I would suggest that we do that one in writing. I would suggest that we take that one in writing, or do you feel you can answer pretty quickly?
I could try to assist as best as I can with the limited knowledge I may have. Yeah. In these circumstances, and that's why I use the word ab initio, but I understand that I should clarify. By starting the process, you invite the person to respond. So you say, look, this has come to our attention. You don't act on it without giving them the chance to see what has been said, what has been alleged. We got a certain response. Inherent within that response, certain members of the commission raised further questions because there appeared to be internal conflicts within the bosom and belly of that response. At one point saying one thing, at another point saying another. In those circumstances, it was felt that there is need for further inquiry. We are still not just accepting carte blanche, the recommendation of the PCA, because we must still be fair to that person. So therefore, that's when the issue came up as to whether we should now investigate this further.
All right.
And the vote was taken.
Just a second.
Or stop the process.
Just a second. Yes.
Or stop the process.
Oh, well, and the cast and vote was to stop the process.
Right, good. In which case, we will still want, because Mr. George, you gave great information, but it did not give us an answer to the question, the standard operating procedure when a complaint of that nature comes to the attention.
Right, and no, but you said that would be in writing.
We'll take that one in writing. Mr. Dayal Singh as the closing. All right, Mr. Dayal Singh and then Mr. Singh.
Mr. Sukram, this question is for you. I have been concerned all along about the relationship between the firm and the client and having excellent people in their own right without the requisite executive recruitment qualifications and experience in the process. Mr. George, if my life depended on a defense in court, I come into you. You're an excellent lawyer. But you put something on the record which shows that the commission does not understand HR practice. And that is my concern. Question is, when you said that if you mark in papers, you want to know the name of the person to judge the nuances, that is wrong in HR.
Do you agree
at the first level, you blind. You blind all of this to eliminate bias. So my question to Mr. Sukram, given the demonstrated capability of your persons in their fields of expertise, but not in executive recruitment, are you as the firm comfortable that these individuals who are excellent people but do not have the requisite HR qualifications as demonstrated, are you comfortable that the firm did the correct thing in having them involved intimately in the process ab initio, to borrow a term from Mr. Martin George?
So we must remember that the process was owned by the PSC. It is their process. And I think that should take precedent and preface the answer to your question. The legal judgment went on to say, the Police Service Commission, and I could quote, it is free to do or not to do. I have to do this so I could set the...
But as the professional firm being engaged, is it not your duty to guide those persons, excellent as they are, but who are not versed in executive recruitment?
And you basically answered the question. That is exactly what we did. We guided these people.
But you had them intimately involved.
We give them the tools and the technique to be able to function at that level.
Mr. Ganga Singh to close.
Earlier on, in answer to the chairman of the committee, you indicated that when he asked the question, and I put it in my language, that one person emerged as the top gun in both the Commissioner of Police assessment process for the Commissioner of Police and for the Deputy Commissioner of Police. One person emerged as the top gun in both areas. And in response to his question, so this is after all the assessment by KPMG, after you took all your factors into consideration for the merit list. The one person emerged top gun in both the DCOP and the Commissioner of Police. Clear on that? But in response, your answer, which had me a bit puzzled, is that you said that in the event that the person is eliminated, that the Parliament does not agree with the top gun in the Commissioner of Police, then you fall back on the Deputy Commissioner of Police. I was a bit puzzled by that answer. Because you establish an order of merit, and you expect the order of merit based on your process, which you took ownership of, to withstand the integrity of the parliamentary process. All right, so I want an explanation as to why you made that comment.
When we were preparing the order of merit list for the Commissioner of Police, that one was prepared first, and then we went to the order of merit list for Deputy Commissioners of Police. If that person who top scored overall was not the person chosen, and let's say you went to the second name on the list, which you could have gone to when we submitted that, then it simply means that on the other list, the other order of merit list for deputy commissioners of police, the two of the names that appeared on that first list would appear on the second list. I don't know how else to explain that. I don't see the difference in that.
To see, to have finish our interrogation of the process through you today. I think that might stand, but members of the committee are of the view that we should review the Hansard record of that which transpired today. And upon such review, we will determine whether we want any further amplification on any issue. I don't think there are any new issues that might arise, but it's also possible because this is a public forum and the public are constantly watching and keeping in touch with us as a committee through the Secretariat. So the idea is we would like to genuinely and sincerely thank you for your attendance today. We would like as well to thank you for your service to Trinidad and Tobago. And we appreciate the fact that you understand, even though you are no longer a member of the Commission, you held an important office under our Constitution, providing exquisite service, and you recognize that it should extend to hearings like these in the public interest. We really, genuinely appreciate that. As such, we would like as well to thank KPMG for its service on the contract to you and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We would like to thank the media for being in attendance, and we would like to thank the Secretariat and the staff of the Parliament for its usual hospitality and professionalism in ensuring that this committee carried out the mandate that the House of Representatives has put before us. So in the spirit of thanks, we bid you farewell. We bid you safe travel to your respective homes and offices. And in the event, upon review of what transpired today, we should ask you kindly to be with us only for a short while for amplification on a few things. I thank you very warmly. This meeting, public hearing, is now put at an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and members, just for clarification, at present, Mr. Kisoon, Commodore, and myself, we are in the unique position of being neither fish nor fowl, because while there is no commission, we still remain commissioners.
We thank you all very much for that, though I see neither feather nor scale. But we thank you very much for that. Thank you.